So today on First Patient In, I'd like to cover a key topic in patient recruitment, and that is once we have a group of pre-qualified potential participants from our advertising campaign, how do we go about predicting and modeling how many of those will actually become study subjects and how we use that information subsequently to monitor site performance. It's a big topic. I'm not going to be able to cover all of it, but I think there are a couple of key issues here that are vexing to study sponsors and source of some confusion. So I'd like to get into the details of those and dig into it a little bit to give a sense of how we go about doing that. And I'll just pause here to note, if you like what you see here, by all means, feel free to share it, feel free to reuse it. All we ask is that you do give appropriate credit to CHG Trials if you do, and that you don't use it for commercial purposes. We're providing this free of charge, and we hope you do the same. Sounds like a good deal, right? Okay, well, let's jump into it then. Those of you who have heard me speak on this topic before know that I'm not necessarily a big fan of funnel metrics, and I do find their value kind of limited, both as a predictive tool or as a normative tool for evaluating performance. However, having said that, individual segments may still be informative, and I think referral conversion is one of those segments that's an important piece of the puzzle. Overall, we do know that being good stewards of a budget, and an advertising budget can be large, means we need to know as early as possible how much of our effort is going to result in actual patients in the actual trial. And importantly, the lag from referral to consent can be many weeks in time. So getting a good handle on it as early as possible is key because we're resolving a lot of uncertainty. This top part of the funnel, from impressions or views into referrals, can happen literally these days in minutes. At longest, it happens over the course of a couple of days, but response is generally pretty instantaneous, and our ability to pre-screen is generally pretty instantaneous. It's this last little bit here, and you can see that's a 20-to-1 drop-off there, so only 5% or so of those referrals are getting into the study in this example. That can take weeks for that to happen, and so it becomes very key for us to understand the size and shape of that referral conversion component of this part of the funnel. What pretty much every sponsor seems to do when it comes time to analyzing referral conversions is to plot their referrals and consented patients on the timeline. And that does yield a pretty plausible looking graph. It sort of makes sense. But this approach does have two really fatal flaws that prevent us from getting a good grip on what's going on in our campaign. First of all, they don't show at all the variations in time from referral to consent. So a patient who's referred at a particular given time may consent to the study in the matter of days, or maybe a week or two, but maybe many weeks before some of those patients convert. So referrals from a particular point in time show up in different points of time on the conversion curve, and this happens, of course, over the entire course of the study. So it's not only hard to tell where the referral ends up, it's also hard to tell where those consented patients came from because they come from different points on the referral curve. Secondly, doesn't accurately portray proportions. This study shows an example where actually about 10% of the referrals are consenting into the study. It's actually really hard to tell just from looking at the picture, and it's pretty much impossible to tell whether that proportion is really getting better or worse over time compared to earlier in the study. The lines are just too far apart, the proportions are just too extreme for us visually to really grasp what's going on with the study. So what's a good alternative? Well, what we would suggest is that instead of tying our referrals and consents to those absolute dates, let's use relative timing. Let's just look at the time from the referral date to the screening date. We're going to call that TTC, the time to consent. You see we've added a column here that is just the number of days from referral to screening. What that does is enables us to treat all referrals as essentially equal and model out the time it took to get every patient into the study. We can then take those numbers and group them into daily or weekly cohorts. In general, we found weekly works just fine. We're really not gaining any granularity or precision by pushing this to daily. We certainly don't need real-time data. That's just throwing a lot of resources without really any benefit in terms of making our model better. What we want to focus on here is getting an accurate picture of what's going on, not a minute-by-minute picture of what's going on. And once we have all the referrals baseline in the same way, we can then model out how they convert over time relative to their referral date. So we can treat all referrals as equal. Here we have 3 examples of that curve for 3 different studies, showing a fairly sizable range of behavior, some similarities and some differences that are worth pointing out. Some are fairly convex, do have fast uptake. Study 1 here had about the highest conversion rate. It also had a very early conversion rate. You can see 9% or so of our referrals had converted by week 2. That's actually a higher percentage than ever converted in study 2. On the other hand, study 2 had a lot of concavity. It was very slow on the uptake, and that was a little bit predictive in the end that this would not be a study that converted at a high rate. But in general, all of these are moving in a pretty linear fashion. And one thing they all have in common, and they all have in common with other studies that we've done, is you'll notice by about week 7, we hit the plateau. Regardless of what percentage they're at, they're about hitting where they're going to stay for the remainder of the campaign. And we find this to be true pretty consistently across multiple studies, that by week 7, if you're going to refer into the study, you have referred into the study over 90% of the time. If we wanted to be really precise, we could wait till week 8 and get a slightly better number, but really we always see signs of that plateau by week 7. So knowing that plateau is there is a really important consideration in how we model out what's going to happen in the study. As I mentioned before, the progression is generally linear. We do see kind of a straight line across multiple studies, but a lot of variation early on. So it's important, very important to realize that weeks 2 and 3 are not good predictors of our eventual conversion rate. I know everyone's always excited to understand what's going on very, very early in the campaign, but you can be misled by those early numbers, and you'll not get an accurate sense. You really need to wait. And we found this across multiple studies in very diverse conditions with very diverse entry criteria. The conversions do tend to plateau right at that week 7 to 8 mark. As I mentioned, the conversion rates generally are between 5 and 15%. We've seen some a little lower and some a little higher. What's important, though, when you move forward to predict is understand this is not normative. This is not saying 5% is bad and 15% is good. Some of the trials, some of the best trials that we've ever run have had very low conversion rates. That's just because we've had really high response. For one reason or another, the patients couldn't make it into the study, but there was a lot of interest, and ultimately that 5% turned out to be a lot more cost effective than some studies where we saw a 12 or 15% conversion rate. Some factors that drive the conversion rate up: phase 3 studies tend to have higher conversion rates. Things that are acute conditions where the patient needs something immediately, where there are a few alternatives that are approved on the market, and where you do really rigorous pre-screening up front. Now, if you do that, always, of course, realize you're going to pre-screen out some patients that probably would have been in the study. So you're driving your conversion rate up, but you're probably losing some patients in the bargain. So you need to be very careful about that. Conversely, the factors that drive the conversion rate down: restrictive entry criteria, absolutely number one. Phase 2 studies are especially notorious for that sort of thing. Chronic conditions in general, we've discovered, really have lower conversion rates. Again, the patient has more time, they want to think about it, they often have more alternatives. And paradoxically, as I mentioned earlier, high patient interest can actually drive conversion down, because you'll get a lot of interested patients who want to participate, at least initially, and then will turn out to be not good fits for the study. So that can actually be a good thing that will lower your rate. So again, do not consider these rates really normative. Think of them as predictive tools that are helping you understand how your advertising works. And once we have this model of referral conversion, we can use it not only to predict the performance of future waves of advertising, but it also helps us characterize in a much more fair manner what's going on at the site level, because we can actually take that data and adjust our expectation of the referrals that have been given to each site. We can use that time since the referral to change how many we actually modeled to be converted at each site, and we can compare that to what they've actually converted into the study. That gives us a much more accurate day-to-day picture of what the sites are doing, enables us to compare sites that received a bunch of referrals recently with sites that received a bunch of referrals sometime in the past. We can do a much more direct apples-to-apples comparison, and if we directly compare that adjusted expectation to the actuals, we can develop a nice waterfall plot like this to really give us a sense of which sites are contributing patients into the study at a much higher than expected rate. So this is much more accurate and much more fair. So it's a much better way of assessing site performance relative to the advertising campaign as well. So I hope that gave you some insights into a potentially better way of visualizing and modeling your referral conversions for your advertising campaign. If you have questions or comments, or like to see more examples, by all means, leave a comment here on the blog. We'd love to carry on the dialogue in public. Otherwise, if you'd like to, by all means, feel free to drop us a line via email or visit our website. Thanks so much for visiting First Patient In.